What was the biggest wow, what small world moment for you? On a tiny ferry back from the Aran Islands, the woman sitting behind me on the top deck was someone I had gone to high school with. We grew up in New York and I recognized enough about the conversation she was having with her friend to turn around and be like, "Do I know you?" "Yup, same grade and everything," on a random mid-afternoon ferry in a tiny part of Ireland halfway across the world from our homes. Flew from Houston to London. Went to a pub and sat down next to a guy who lives in my neighborhood. Plot twist, he's a foreign operative tasked with keeping tabs on you at all times. Op has actually got the nuclear launch codes inside of him. His neighbor is tasked with retrieving the codes whenever he gets the call. But in order to do so he needs to kill and dismember Op, so he has to make the decision if the current threat to the country's safety is great enough to justify killing Op to retrieve the codes. About 9 years ago in my college days, I'm a newbie to an internet forum. One day, one of the mods, Mod V, post an obituary that Mod K's wife has passed away due to pulmonary issues. Fast forward a few months later at holiday season, Mod K posts that he's on his way to my hometown. He lives in our capital city. I asked him what the occasion, and he answered that he want to visit his in-laws. I told him that I live there and invited him to hang out if he had free time. So, we met in town square and talk a bit there. We talked about our forum while enjoying coffee. He is one of the senior mod there and he told me several stories about our forum. He is a really nice guy. We decided to go fishing the next day. While fishing he started to told me his work as a Red Cross volunteer, his experience in SAR, and eventually his love story and how he met his wife. It's a sweet story about how he marrying her college sweetheart but unfortunately she passed away just a few months after they married. We got tired fishing and caught several fishes and I invited him to my house to cook them. After lunch, he asked me if I'm interested in volunteering. I told him that I've been active in Boy Scout while in high school but I hardly have enough time now other than college. He then told me that his wife is a Girl Scout and in fact she'd been the leader of Girl Scout while in high school and is the same age as me. I whispered, "Sylvia?" "Yes, oh my god, so you know her." "She was my girlfriend in high school." TLDR, met a guy from the internet, turn out he married my ex-girlfriend and she was passed away. I found someone from my high school class on Reddit. On a post that had 3 comments. That is luck. It was on the school's subreddit. I used to be friends with this guy named Travis. Met someone on Reddit who was named Travis who had problems with his parents like the Travis I knew. Wasn't the Travis I knew, but was neighbors with the Travis I knew. This some Travisception shit here. That was almost a travesty. When I was younger I went on holiday to Tenerife with my mum, met a kid there who was from the town my dad lived in. Him, "Oh, where does your dad live?" Me, 26 something street. Him, "Seriously? That's my old house. Which is your room?" Me, the one at the back?" Him, "That was my room." "No way." MFW, I moved into not only this kid's house but also his old room. Word, dude, I jerked off on every surface. Moved to Tokyo. After a while, neighbor is moving out, I pulled strings for a friend to take his app so he becomes my neighbor. Turns out they were both school friends from long back. Later the next year, my friend moves out, new tenant moves in, he happens to be an old acquaintance of mine. What the duck? We have to keep tabs on you, Truman. My dad had to catch a bus for the first time in 30 years. He gets on and it turns out that the driver is his cousin who he hadn't seen in even longer. They have a quick chat and exchange numbers. Dad takes his seat at the back of the bus. When the driver arrives at the place my dad told him he was going to, he looks in his mirror expecting to see dad waiting to get off but he's not. He is still sat at the back. Driver calls out, no reply. Turns out the long-lost cousin was the last person to see my dad alive. He was dead at the back of the bus. Sorry about your dad, bro. Flew from UK to Berlin for a break. Matched with someone on Tinder, not a hookup or anything, she just agreed to show me best Christmas markets. Anyway, as we are talking it turns out her childhood friend moved to the UK, happened to live near where I do and just happened to be my daughter's teacher. I lived in London for several years but am originally from a small town in Canada. My best friend from when I was a kid in Canada came out to visit me in London. We were sitting in the pub, and in walked a guy who we played on the same soccer team with as kids. We ended up spending the evening with him. The craziest part about it was that it happened when my friend was visiting as well. Whoa whoa whoa. Hold it right there. If you live in London, it's called football, not soccer. Weren't the Brits the ones that came up with the term soccer anyway? I once hitchhiked from Dunedin to Auckland, about 1,400 kilometers, and got picked up straight away by a guy going to the same suburb in Auckland as me. I lived in Invercargill for 7 years. I'm back in the USA now though. Kia ora. I moved halfway across the US only to meet a girl on Tinder who lived 30 minutes from me. What makes the world smaller is that her brother went to the same church as me and my cousin was her next door neighbor. I actually ended up marrying her. When the world knocks, you answer the door. What if the world turns out to be a Jehovah's Witness? Last week before work I was reading a highly upvoted post that received gold. When I arrived at work, my coworker mentioned that she received gold for a Reddit post she made. I asked what the post was and it was crazy to realize that it was the post I'd been reading all morning. Not the biggest small world moment ever, but it was cool. I had a coworker tell me about a decision he was having a hard time with regarding his schooling. A week later, I find this description of the exact dilemma between programs. Went to explore in Mexico, and found a family from my small town of 5,000 people in northern Canada there too. At first I thought you meant just randomly explore in Mexico and I was like, wow, that's even crazier. Turns out there's actually a company called Explore. Huh, yeah, I guess I should have explained that. It's like a water park kinda thing with cenotes and zip lines, lunch buffets and a few bars. It was pretty fun. Edit, spelling. Not me, but my mom. She works at a pain medicine clinic where representatives from medication companies occasionally come and bring lunch for the employees to pitch their medications and talk to the doctors who work there. She began talking to one of the reps, who was a few years younger than her, and who mentioned that she was from the same town that my mom was from. She proceeded to mention that a member of my mom's graduating class, who my mom recognized by name, was her husband's older brother. Then, my mom comes to find out that she and the rep graduated from the same high school, only a few years apart from each other. My mom came home from work that day starting her story with, "I made a new friend at work." It was a wholesome what a small world moment for her. I work with my uncle, who's in his 60s, doing odd jobs and such. This one job we are working on is in a $1 million home when the homeowner's roommate came home from work for the day. He gets to bullshitting with my uncle and apparently they were long-lost friends who used to party together in the 70s but neither of them recognized each other. It was so cool to hear them talk about the old times. Also a little bit morbid once the conversation shifted to who has passed away, but thankfully that didn't last long. Overall crazy to think that all these years later they met each other by chance on a job that I booked. I hope this story made sense. I'm a little tired and can't really find the best way to word everything. Wife and I traveled to Beijing 8 years ago, made friends with a couple from Colorado. We lived in Oz. Vacation friends only, no later contact. We moved to Colorado a few years ago. Last year I see this couple at the movies. I'm alone, don't say hi, tell wife, not sure she believes me. Couple months later we are at dinner and see them. We pull up old pictures to prove this is them. Wife and I go say hi, show pictures, memory sharing ensues. Small world, fact. Why didn't you say hi in the cinema? Several years ago I made friends with someone online and later found out she lived in the town I grew up in. Something similar happened to me, except who went to my high school. Same thing happened to me, except she was living right in my apartment, and she was actually a he, and he was actually my friend playing a prank on me by pretending to be a hot chick on Yahoo Chat. Kiwi living in Toronto, visited New York for holiday. Was election in New Zealand, so decided to vote at NZ Embassy. Walk in the door, someone yells out, "Hey, QP tree." Friend of a friend happened to also be an NY. But that's being a Kiwi for you. I hope you're enjoying Toronto. And this freezing weather lol. Was living in Bali temporarily and a friend of mine who lives in the US but is from Chile happened to be there on holiday. We hung out most of his time there except one day where he wanted to go to some temple I wasn't interested in seeing. After he gets back he starts telling me that he met a guy from Peru whilst he was there and they checked out the temple together. A few days later, a university friend of mine who lives in the UK posts pictures of his trip to Bali on Facebook. This friend is from Peru. I ask him, and sure enough, he went to that temple and sure enough, he met a dude from Chile. Neither of them realized I was a mutual connection of theirs. The guy from Peru had also not realized that I was in Bali. Further crazy twist, when I got back to the UK a couple of months later, I randomly bumped into the same Peruvian friend on a train, in a part of the country that I had never been to, and we chatted for an hour. Shit's weird, man. My brother met a guy online named Hand. The guy was his friend Andrew. They didn't meet through mutual friends online, and it was a random game of Siege. I always get put with people from my region playing Siege, you can tell from the accent, so either it's a very popular game here or they try to reduce latency and end up pairing people from similar regions for network reasons. I think it's both. I come from a small town in GA. I came to Germany with the army and met the woman who eventually became my wife. Her brother had a party one night and invited his first girlfriend from when he was a teenager. I got to talking to her and found out that she had been working in Atlanta and had started dating a guy from my hometown. She and I actually knew some of the same people. He and I are great friends. It's great to have someone here to talk about home with. My dad was in the Air Force and I had a similar situation when I moved to the States. The kid was my age, about 6, and we were at the same barbecue playing together in England. Years later and 2 states after, we ended up at the same high school. I was on a chat room for one of my first times, so I was a little kid, and someone said they lived down the street from me. I'm now realizing they must have been trolling. Waiting in line for It's a Small World ride at Disney World. Our boat pulls up. Getting out of the boat, in the same row I'm getting into, is a girl I had gone to youth group years ago. Immediately belt out, holy shit. It really is a small world. You saw the opportunity and you took it. We're childhood friends from Germany. I was in Tokyo on that giant crossing in Shibuya 2 years ago. I just stood there and purposely missed a green light to assess this whole situation with hundreds of people crossing every green light. I had a friend traveling randomly through all of Asia for a year, and she happened to be 3 meters next to me in that second and spotted me. Didn't know of each other of being in Tokyo that night. In high school I went to Rome, from the US, on a family vacation over a week-long break. Ended up on a random city bus with the vice principal from my school, who happened to also be in Italy for the same break and had gotten on the same random city bus 3 stops earlier. Met my ex in a 7-Eleven while holidaying in Japan. Helped a friend move into her new house. Turns out she was moving into the house I grew up in. Kinda involved in it. My cousin and his friend went traveling around the world about 8 years ago. Never wanted to stick to the typical tourist areas and would venture into the super remote areas. He ended up in Cambodia trekking through the jungles, not another person around for miles. Randomly came across a couple doing the same. Turned out they lived about an hour's drive from each other back in the UK. The 4 of them stuck together for a few days and then went their separate ways, but not before adding each other on Facebook. The guy's profile picture was one that I had taken of him in a nightclub a week prior to him leaving. I worked as a photographer at the time doing nightclub and live music events. Last year I made this comment where I mentioned a teacher I had in grade school. Later that day I get this message from someone, and it turned out that we both went to the same grade school and had the same teacher just a few years apart. That's crazy. Quick question, if you don't mind, lol. I've always been crazy. Do you get to choose whether or not you have an admin badge in your comments/posts? You mean when I go green? Yeah, we pick when to distinguish comments/posts as mods. That's pretty much mostly for when we're speaking for the team. Admins do the same when they go red. I play online quite often, and in a US server game I met a random guy with whom I did a lot of campaigns in the same team, and well, of course, we started talking on Steam. One day, he asked me if I had a Facebook, which of course I have, and I gave it to him. We spoke about a month in English only, believing we both were from somewhere in the US, and one day I think I never asked him where he lives. Turn out he lived a couple of streets away. In Santiago. In Chile. Was quite shocking for both. XD, we still hang around at times. I found out that my friend for at the time 9 years was my 4th cousin, and we had no idea. I met his cousin at my aunt's genealogy meeting, and she was explaining how we were related, and I found out he was a close relative to my really good friend. We are still great friends to this day. Both of these happened within days of each other, which was extra creepy. My BF's family live about 50 kilometers from us, so not that far, but not close either. His mom saw an old friend in the pub and was chatting to her and her husband. She asked where the husband worked now, since she hadn't seen him in years. He told her and she said, "Oh, I actually know someone who works there." and mentions my name. It's a huge employer with literally thousands of employees, so chances are slim he'd even know the name of the person she knows, let alone work with them, but he does know me. He literally works for the same boss, in the same unit, on the same floor, at a desk 100 meters from me. Then, a few days later, I find out my BF's cousin who lives in another state almost 1,000 kilometers away is friends with one of my closest high school friends, who only moved there 3 to 4 years ago. So weird. I was friends with this girl who regularly attended Waterstones, whom I met on a regular basis. A couple years later I had met this guy at Waterstones, also giving him book recommendations, and one day there was a social event in which I invited both of them too. As they began talking, and contacting family, they realized they were long-lost cousins. When they told me, I just said exactly that, wow, what a small world. They both thanked me for bringing them together, and that was that. I met my best friend in Vietnam 1967, I wasn't on vacation, our patrol leader always stuck us together, a 6'4" inches 250 pounds white boy and a 6'3" inches 240 pounds black guy. He called us Salt and Pepper. We had some bad times during Hugh and a few other times, but when I got shrapnel from a mine he and I were separated. I tried to get mail to him but it never worked out. 20-something years later I'm getting fuel and there he is. We lived 20 minutes apart all those years. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.